Thanks, Matt. The slides should be coming up in just a second. If somebody could confirm that they can see those.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so welcome to your session today on low-code automated UI testing for model-driven apps. You've got me, Mark, and David presenting. We'll do our introductions in a second. It's our first time delivering this session, so bear with us, but I'm hoping that you'll all agree we've got some great content for you today. So hi everyone, I'm Max. I'm a senior software engineer at Capgemini. I've been at Capgemini for the last 8 years, and I've been working with Dynamics and now the Power Platform for around the last 6 years. My interests are predominantly Power Platform, Azure, and DevOps. I'm the author of the power-apps-specflow-bindings framework that we're going to be going through today, as well as the Development Hub, which is another open source project that helps teams build Power Apps and practice effective continuous integration. So I'm hoping that we can do a session on that in the near future as well. I do a lot of work as well on Capgemini's internal Power Platform tooling, and we're pushing to make a lot of this open source now. My GitHub profile's on the slide if anybody wants to follow me there, or you can keep an eye on the Capgemini organization for any Power Platform related repositories that'll be popping up. And over to you, David.
Hi, I'm David Robertson. I'm a Dynamics 365 developer and consultant here at Capgemini. I've contributed a little bit to this tool, but I'm also using this on projects. When I found it, I became quite a big fan of this automated UI testing, so I wanted to get involved and also share this with the community. And I think it's next over to Mark.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, Mark Cunningham, also work for Capgemini. It's very similar to Max. I'm a contributor to this library. I've written some of the tests that prove that the bindings that you're going to see today work. As you can see, there's my GitHub page. I'm also an author of a Fluent API test engine, which you can use to do integration testing with Dynamics. And as you can see, I'm a bit of a certification junkie. I've done a few of the Microsoft paths.
Cool, thanks both. So the agenda pretty full today. We'll do a brief introduction on what it is we're trying to achieve with this framework and what we've built so far. The rest of the session is going to be more practical content around the framework itself. So the installation and configuration, the actual writing of tests, and then running it as part of your CI pipeline, which is where you really start to see the benefits of doing this. If we have time at the end, like I said, we'll do a Q&A session. And just to reiterate that, if anybody has questions as we're going through, probably putting them in the chat is going to be the best thing to do. And one of the other guys can pick it up while we're presenting. So what are we trying to solve? First of all, so this statement kind of embodies it. A low-code platform demands a low-code test solution. We've got a platform that has rightfully attracted a lot of people because we don't need to write much code, if any, to create powerful apps. But creating apps is only really one part of the story. Automated testing is just as important, especially when you're dealing with large enterprise-grade projects. The next point there, using EasyRepro alone relies on developers that can engineer an effective test assembly. So hopefully a lot of you are already aware what EasyRepro is. If you're not, it's a library that Microsoft have written to make interacting with model-driven apps using Selenium WebDriver a lot easier. It's kind of like a page object model for model-driven apps. So it has made things a lot easier, but it's still possible for you to write highly ineffectual tests just using EasyRepro alone. It isn't the fault of EasyRepro, it's just that these things are outside of its scope, essentially. The third point on there is that it doesn't provide any functionality outside of abstracting the WebDriver interactions. So as we just said, it makes it easier to interact with the UI, but it doesn't provide assistance when it comes to other concepts that come into play when you're doing test automation. Things like making sure that you can run your tests in parallel, managing the user identities that you're going to run those tests as, doing test data setup and teardown. It's difficult to implement those additional concepts unless, as we've said here, you've got developers that are comfortable with Power Apps and the APIs, client API or the web API, and also have a good understanding of test automation. So making effective use of the APIs when you're doing things like your test data setup is going to give you tests that are a lot less brittle and quicker to run. So you really do see some benefits there if you have somebody implementing these tests that understands those APIs. And so in response to these issues, then what is the power-apps-specflow-bindings? So it's an automated UI testing framework for model-driven apps. I'll give you a bit of a background. I started it about 2.5 years ago to address those issues that we've just covered. It was around the same time that EasyRepro started to emerge. And the framework is heavily dependent on EasyRepro to do a lot of the legwork. I ended up investing a lot of time in other projects, so this never really got off the ground back then. But I picked it up again this year, and a lot of work has been done by me and the other guys to revive it. At that time, 90% of the functionality was for the deprecated web client, and it was only covering a fraction of the EasyRepro API. What we have now, I believe, is the full EasyRepro API for the unified interface. So it's come a long way since then. So essentially, we wrap the EasyRepro API with SpecFlow step bindings. I'm sure at least a few of you are familiar with SpecFlow, but we'll give an overview of what that means later on in the session. And it's a framework that provides the additional functionality necessary for writing the tests. So we're using the word framework here rather than library. I would see EasyRepro as being a library that helps automate model-driven app browser interaction, but the power-apps-specflow-bindings is a framework for testing model-driven apps. And it's built by Power Apps developers, so I think this is a key point as well. We're using this on Capgemini projects, and it's being maintained by people who are actively building Power Apps. So hopefully that gives us a little bit of additional insight over maybe somebody who would be tackling this problem from purely a testing background. And it's currently available as pre-release, so we've got that caveat in there. It's on version 0.10.3, which means we're still in development and reserve the right to introduce breaking changes, although I don't see that happening that frequently. We are looking to do our first major releases as soon as that's practical, and we can offer the kind of stability and functionality that comes with doing a first major release. So we've talked a lot, but this is what a test that has been written with the framework actually looks like. You can see how the steps are parameterized there, like the app, the user that we've logged in as. But this is only a fraction of the steps that are available. So there's, like I said, it's the entirety of the EasyRepro API. Theoretically, anything that you could do with EasyRepro, you can do with this, and more, because we also offer extensibility. So what are the benefits then? They should be self-explanatory, really, but it's effective low-code test automation. You can spend more time defining what your tests should be rather than worrying about the implementation of them. It's a significant time saving when compared with writing equivalent tests that aren't using the framework. For us, what this meant was we could comfortably adopt automated acceptance tests as part of our project's definition of done without worrying if we would be stretched. The test can be run safely in parallel, so that it does drastically reduce the total test time, and we can run on parallel in thread-based test runners. And obviously that's a good thing because you want to get that rapid feedback on your build quality. And as you saw in the example, we can give friendly aliases to different identities. So that test was running as an admin, but we can specify who we want our tests to run as. And you can also make use of SpecFlow scenario outlines as well. It will allow you to run the same test essentially for multiple different identities, so possibly different security roles in your app, without you having to actually duplicate the scenarios themselves. And it's easily extensible when code's needed, as I've just mentioned. So the big one's probably custom controls, but I'm sure that there are assertions and things that maybe we don't offer that you might need, but that's absolutely no problem to do that. And what we'll cover doing the kind of doing your own step bindings that integrate with this framework later on. And you can easily do things like set up complicated preconditions, including with random data generation, so random first names, last names, emails, that kind of thing. That was a feature that we added recently, and one of the main reasons behind that functionality was actually because Randomly generating data is important if you are creating records that have, say, alternate keys. If you want to run your tests in parallel and you're using the same values for those keys, then you're obviously going to get clashes, and it's going to be a problem. But it also results in test data that's just more true to life. So the next slide, who are the intended users? The three amigos. So we've taken this pretty much straight from specflow.org. It talks about the collaboration between developers, testers, and product owners, who all have their own part to play in working with a SpecFlow solution. And ultimately, I think the point is that this framework is helping you to build a SpecFlow solution. So any SpecFlow principles or documentation that they provide are going to be relevant to you when you're using this. And I'd really recommend that anybody that's using this framework familiarizes themselves with SpecFlow first. So I believe that that's it for our introduction. I'll hand it over to David now to take us through the installation and configuration.
Thanks, Max. Hi. So I'm going to walk you through installation and configuration. I'm going to give you some, share some information first of all, and then we'll do a little demo. Cool. So let's move on to installation. Now, the prerequisite on this is there is some knowledge you require on SpecFlow, so you'll have to set up and install that. But once you've done that, you can install the NuGet package, which is the Capgemini power-apps-specflow-bindings, into your SpecFlow test project, and then you need to add a SpecFlow configuration file to load the bindings. Cool. Once you've installed that, this will add a configuration file, which is a power-apps-bindings.yml, which is automatically added to your project when the package is installed. This file allows you to configure your target environment, your browser settings, and your user identities. As we said, you can manage your test users. You can add test users to an array of users, and this is what it look like. So you've got your users here. You've got your username, password, and alias. Alias is what's used to reference that user. And these username and passwords are set as environment variables, which you can use to kind of configure either on your desktop or on your Azure DevOps pipeline if you're looking to do a build and release. Cool. You also use this to configure your browser options. This offers parity with EasyRepro. As you can see here, you can configure your browser type, whether it's headless. Headless means whether it opens up on your whether it opens up Chrome, for example, or if it's run in the background. You also need to set the width, height, and whether it starts maximized. Cool. On to the demo. I'm going to try and share my screen now. And I'm going to go about and install this and set this up. Max, could you let me know if my screen is visible on my on Visual Studio? Thank you.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah,
It is. Yeah.
Perfect. Cool. So I've got Visual Studio 2019 open here. I'm going to create a new project. Cool. I'm just going to create a Net Framework project. A class library. Bear with me while it just creates this. Cool. I'm just going to get rid of this class because this isn't necessary for this. Cool. I'm going to manage the NuGet packages for this project. First solution I'm going to install is the SpecFlow bindings. This takes a moment to do. Cool, that's installed. Now I'm going to choose to, this works with multiple test runners, but I'm going to choose to use MS test. So this means I need to install the SpecFlow MS test adapter. I'm going to update MS Test Framework. And then I'm going to install the MS Test adapter afterwards. As mentioned, this does work with other test runners, such as NUnit and XUnit and stuff like that. Cool. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is we need to install the Chrome WebDriver, which allows us to run this test on Chrome. I currently have Chrome version 87, so I'm going to install the WebDriver for that. Cool. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is this SpecFlow.json configuration file, which allows you to load the bindings for the Power Apps. Cool. This is how you add the step assemblies. Cool. Now we've got to configure the power-apps-binding file. Now, you could just, there's quite good documentation how to set this up, but I'm just going to run through the options very quickly. So, browser type, we're going to be running Chrome. Headless. Oh. I'm going to set to false for the purpose of demoing, so we can show the test running. Type. And we don't want it to start maximized. Cool. Now the environment variables are pre-configured, so we're not sharing the credentials used for logging in. So I'm just going to paste these over. And for the alias, I'm going to call this a salesperson. That should be configured now. Now we can build a feature file, which we'll go into more information later, but this allows us to create our tests. And just to show you this working, well, hopefully working, as long as we don't get cursed by the live demo, I'm going to see if we can run this. Cool. Create a generic step like that. I'm going to call this scenario login and see account, new account button. Cool, given. Ooh.
Check your specflow.json file there, David. I just wonder if you've got a. Oh no, it's just an additional space, but it looks like it's. Oh no, you're missing the end of the array, the angle bracket.
Ah, of course.
The square bracket, sorry.
Ah, of course.
Yeah, there you go. Hopefully
Thanks, Max. What I'm probably going to have to do now is reset.
Yeah, you might need to restart VS after that, unfortunately. It's just an issue with the SpecFlow extension for Visual Studio. Sometimes it caches the step bindings, and if you update your configuration file, it doesn't always reflect immediately. If you're talking, David, you're on mute, by the way.
Oh, am I? Okay, so I just restarted Visual Studio. Cool, and what you see is step suggestion list is being populated. Cool, now we've got some IntelliSense here showing us the steps. So if we're given cool, into the app name, I was probably being a little bit impatient with it. I'm going to want to log into the Sales Hub app as my user, a salesperson. Just going to check that that's correct. A salesperson, yep. Cool. Now the next part is the when, as part of the given when. And I'm going to click the sub area of the group name, and I'm going to choose accounts. Of the customers group. And here's my assertion, what I'm actually testing. I can see the new command. Going to run and build this. Cool, it's created my test. I'm going to run this test. As you can see, it's taken us to the login. It's using my credentials. By the way, I'm completely hands-free here, so you can probably see on the camera. This is all being automated. This is the result of headless being set to false. That's actually opening Chrome, and you can see it running. Cool, it's logged into the Sales Hub app. It's gone to look at the accounts. And the test has passed because it could see the new command. So yes, that's how to set up and how to write a very simple test. I believe it's now over to Mark.
Yep, thank you, David. All right, just going to share the screen again. Hopefully you can see my slides. Let's just whip through them. Okay, so on to writing tests. So I think David touched on a very good entry point there. So what I'm going to go through in this section is some things to watch out for when you start writing your tests, some common pitfalls and things that will keep you on the straight and narrow. So let's just quickly touch again on features, scenarios and bindings. So tests are written, as you've noticed, in the Gherkin given when then syntax. This is designed to be human readable and understandable by people of different levels, from business analysts to functional consultants to developers. And I think you'll all agree, it makes it very easy to transfer when you write your stories into a writable test. Typically, what happens is these texts, what we deem as standard input text, it gets converted into what's known as a binding. So behind the scenes, this obviously gets compiled, and then that is what gets turned into a test that gets discovered. Power-apps-specflow-bindings removes the need to write much of those bindings for model-driven apps. So I think Max touched on it earlier. You'll see with the IntelliSense that there's hundreds of bindings that you can use straight out of the box. You don't have to be writing low-level Selenium to try and work out how to automate dynamics. We'll touch on that in the coming slides. Okay, so SpecFlow definition of bindings, this is from their website, but just to set the scene and the context of really understanding this, the Gherkin feature files are closer to free text than to code. They cannot be executed as they are. The automation that connects the specification to the application interface has to be developed first. The automation that connects the Gherkin specifications to the source code is called a binding. Now the binding is the glue really. What we work with typically is bindings, and I'll show you that when we come to the demo, what a binding looks like. Okay, so this is what a sample feature file looks like out of the box. So I think David showed you there, when you create a new feature file, it gives you what's known as the vanilla, or the the hello world example. But you can see here that it consists of a feature at the top. So the feature is the high level thing that you're trying to test. You explain what your intention is, who you're doing it as, and what you expect the outcome to be. So it's all very logical from a test perspective. You can apply tags across the top as well. So tags help you when you get to your CI/CD, they can help you determine which ones are for example, if you're doing smoke testing, if you deem them as your core tests, because you don't necessarily always want to run all of your tests. And it's a way to organize your tests into logical groupings. And as you can see there's the given when then syntax, which is what we were just mentioning. All right, so using the existing bindings, there's a few notions to be aware of. Preconditions, actions and assertions. Basically, preconditions are things that you do at the beginning of your test. So I'll show you that in a few moments time, but it's where you basically load your data, you prepare your test ready for execution. Then you've got your actions, which are the actual interfacing of the test, running the test. And then you've got the assertions, which are the, what you measure against in a test. And so you can think of it, your precondition is your given, your action is your when, and your assertion is your then in our situation. As Max, I think this touches on what Max mentioned earlier, we do have every binding covered. So we do have full feature parity with EasyRepro. And if it changes, you'll see that we add a new binding. So we stay up to date. Okay, key feature here is the IntelliSense. Now this will be your best friend when you're writing tests. The IntelliSense will basically avoid you, first of all, it'll make your bindings discoverable, but also will stop you accidentally rewriting a binding because you couldn't find it. The IntelliSense is very powerful, it's regex driven. So for example, if you're working with a grid, you can type the word grid or subgrid, and it will basically eliminate all of the bindings that don't contain that text. So it makes them very easy to search. I think that's it on. One thing I did forget to mention is that there is the extension for Visual Studio. So if you're going to be working with feature files, if you want to get the full power of it, you do need to install the extension, and I can show you that on the screen quickly how we do that if you're not aware. Okay, moving on to test data setup. So yes, what we do, and you'll see in the demo, but we use JSON notation. We use the Web API syntax from Dynamics 365. So it's all standard. You're not expected to learn any sort of custom JSON. you could literally steal this from the API, put it into your JSON file, and then unless you need to do some more advanced features such as aliasing or randomizing data, you can get going very quickly. Now, why would you want to do this in JSON files? Well, firstly, it's so much faster than doing it via the UI. It does it using the web API, which obviously is, as I say, is faster, but it saves you having to create data, going through the UI and then using essentially Selenium to enter records, save them. It takes time, so it's really recommended to do it this way. So I will talk a little bit more about these aliases and these JSON files. I'll show you a test that implements this in a few moments. Okay, so here's an example of what the JSON files look like. So what we have here is two essentially related records. But what you can see, if you look very carefully, is you've got the alias at the top on the left. So the alias is the friendly reference for the record that you're trying to create. So if you look towards the scenario, we say, given I have created a new issue, what it does, it looks for that, essentially that tag. And what it will do at runtime is it will go and create an issue with the data that you've supplied in the JSON file. Now, the reason that's very powerful is it stops you having to, do it via file convention, so you don't have to point it. So I think you'll agree it makes it very easy to set up test data. Okay, so here's a very powerful feature which we've added within the last few weeks. So this is aliasing using lookup values. So what you tend to find in a classic example is you're trying to create an account and then you need a primary contact created. And what we do here is essentially allow you to have separate files, which makes it very clean and reusable, but you can just reference that sample contact by its alias. So you can see on the right hand side, we're saying we want to create a primary contact, but we want to use the JSON file called a sample contact. And cleverly, it goes and replaces the GUID at runtime. So it's very powerful, especially when you've got more complex data setup. And here's another cool feature which was added. So we've added a new feature which allows you to randomize test data. So if you've got accounts and contacts, you want to make them look real rather than just having hard-coded values all the time. We really harness the power of a library called Faker.js. For those of you that have worked with .NET, there's a library called Bogus. I think that's the alternative. But in the JavaScript world, Faker.js has a number of pre-built features that allows you to generate real-looking test data, which is unique every time. And I think Max touched on it earlier, when you've got things like alternate keys or values that need to change for every test, in multi-parallel example, this is absolutely vital that you have something like this. Okay, authoring your own bindings. So this is when you really want to extend what you're given out of the box. So the first thing is to always consider when you need to author your own bindings. So it will typically be when there's a binding that isn't available, or for example, you've got a PCF control, custom PCF control that doesn't have any sort of SpecFlow binding that covers it, and then you'll want to do your own. So obviously, if you see something that's a key feature that hasn't been covered by EasyRepro, you're always welcome to contribute, because it's contributions that keep the library fresh. Okay, so how would you go about doing your own binding? I'll show you this quickly in a demo, but basically you need to inherit from a class called the powerapps-step-definer. And when you do that, you get access to the driver, the XRM app from EasyRepro, and a number of other features that we offer, such as your test configuration for your test run. There are some other SpecFlow constructs that you may find useful, especially around hooks. Hooks allow you to plug into certain life cycle of the test. So an example is a before scenario and after scenario. And you also have transformations, which allow you to take input, and then at runtime you can dynamically change the values. An example would be if you had a date and you need to say, and I add 7 days to the date. Your binding will go dynamically, get that value, add 7 days to the input, and then obviously your test can be a bit more dynamic. Okay, so I'm going to quickly show you a quick, just so you can see how this all plumbs together. Hopefully everybody can see my screen now.
Yep, can see that.
Perfect. So let's quickly start. So we mentioned earlier that we were looking at these aliasing. So I just want to show you what these JSON files look like. So exactly as we showed on the slides there, there is no smoke and mirrors. It is just plain JSON. One key gotcha that I would be useful to mention is that when you run these tests, always make sure that you copy these JSON files. If you don't, you'll be scratching your head wondering why it's not creating anything, why it's not picking anything up. So it's just a key, a pro dev hint there, just to remember to copy that. Now, if you want to author your own bindings, and we touched on it here, I've done a very lightweight, a light touch example. So you typically create a class, you decorate your class with binding, and you inherit from the power-apps step definer. When you do that, you've got the option to start magically. You can do things with the XRM app. You can, start, you can do logins, for example. You can do online logins. You can do whatever you need. And that then gives you the full power of the driver, the XRM app, and the test settings. So this is, I would say, the cheapest way to extend. If you need a custom binding, this would be the way to go. So hopefully you'll agree that's quite easy to do. There's no real magic there. It's just knowing which library and which class to inherit. Okay, so let's have a look at some examples of these tests. So here's some I created earlier because I know we were tight on time. But what you can see here is that we're creating two very dummy tests, but they log in, and what they do is they create a contact and they create an account, as we were showing in the slides there. So again, no magic, it's all plain English. But while I am here, what I will show you is some of essentially I'll show you some of the IntelliSense options, because I appreciate, there's so many bindings to show. But what you can do, if you start typing, let's say you can, as I was mentioning earlier, you can start typing and it will start correcting it for you. It'll obviously show you if you do a typo like I did there. But the other key bit is that after an and, so you do a then, and what you suddenly see, there's many here, but let's say, for example, I want to do something with a form. I want to verify that I see the right form. I can quickly find it. So here it says, I am presented with a form name. Very easy, very quick. And that's it really. I mean, I can quickly, we can run these tests if you want to see how easy it is. There's no changes to what David showed you though. So my SpecFlow file, my bindings file is the same. My SpecFlow file is the same. There's no smoke and mirrors again. So I think to save some time, Max, I'll jump back to you.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. We've technically only got about 10 minutes remaining, and we did want to try and leave some time for questions at the end as well. So let me just share the slides up again, and we'll cover the last bit, which is going to be CI. So running this as part of your CI pipeline. Quite a few slides to navigate through, sorry. Okay, here we go. So CI, CD. So we'll look now then at how this all ties together using the power-apps-specflow-bindings as part of your CI pipeline. You really only begin to realize, I think, most of the benefits of this kind of testing when it's run as part of an automated CI process, and it can give you feedback on the quality of your builds. Realistically, nobody kind of runs the full suite of tests like locally every day. So I think, yeah, you kind of have to run it as part of your CI pipeline to see any real benefit. The couple of considerations, first of all, so the test project itself, headless mode that should be enabled if you're going to be running on the Microsoft hosted agents. If you don't, the resolution is going to be around 800 by 600, and it's just not going to be fit for testing at all. You'll probably also want screenshots, so your test framework should allow attachments. So NUnit or MSTest are both examples of test frameworks that can do that. I think XUnit is probably the only one, at least when I used it, wasn't able to support this. The test should be written in a way that they can be safely run in parallel. So I think we've kind of labored that point through the call. You also need to consider the fact that depending on your chosen test framework, test runner, you probably have an additional step there to enable parallel test runs. With NUnit, that's as simple as just a assembly attribute, so it's not difficult at all. And the last point then, so you're going to need to create a SpecFlow hook to attach screenshots on failures. So we actually capture screenshots automatically of failed scenarios, but if you want to see them as part of your test run on Azure pipelines, then you'll need to handle attaching them. So that's because it's framework dependent, and we don't mandate that you use a particular test framework. So there's an example there. It's on the development hub that's using NUnit if you want to see how you can attach those screenshots. And pipeline considerations. You might want to add a dummy request before you run the tests. And this is because it's not necessarily a problem for everyone, but if you're running these tests at a scheduled time, so let's say 3 o'clock in the morning, you do like an overnight deployment. If you don't wake the instance up first, then you'll probably start to see timeouts in your first 8 tests or however many run in parallel. And that's a Selenium timeout, and I've looked into it. It's not exposed outside of EasyRepro, so to change that, it would be an EasyRepro fix. But I don't think it's that much of an issue, because if you just do a WhoAml or something with the Power Platform build tools, then it'll be good to go. The pipeline should reset the environment and deploy your package before the tests. So we do some cleanup during the test teardown, but we can't guarantee that the instance is going to be in the same state that it was before the test run. So the foolproof approach here is to run the test after a full reset. Parallel again, so keep the execution time down. If you don't do this, you could easily be looking at a total test run time of several hours. I know we are in our project. It's about 3.5 hours if you run it sequentially. So if you want rapid feedback, it's really not recommended. And secret variables, so user credentials, are going to need to be mapped as well from Azure pipelines into the task. So there's plenty of documentation that Microsoft provide on doing that. And then onto the demo now, so we'll get a chance to see what this looks like in action. The development hub is an open source project that's on GitHub, and it uses the power-apps-specflow-bindings for its pull request validation pipeline. Does a bunch of other checks as well. All of the checks need to pass in order for the pull request to be merged. The Azure Pipelines project is public, so everyone can see the result of that test run. So from start to finish, this pipeline that we'll be looking at, it builds the package. It updates the solution versions using Git version. It runs code analysis on plugin assemblies and web resources, checks the solution, or the solutions, I should say, depending how many are in the package and which solutions have changed, checks them with the solution checker, deploys to a CI instance, runs integration tests, and then finally runs UI tests. So hopefully showing you this in the context of an actual Power Apps project will make more sense than us kind of coming up with something that's a bit contrived for the demo. And it also means that there's a reference there. If anybody wants to go and have a look at how that pipeline's implemented, then you can just go to the Development Hub repository. So I'll share my screen, and I'll just show you the pipeline that we've got set up for the Development Hub. Just give me a shout when you guys can see that.
Got it, Max.
Cool, thank you. So this is the Development Hub repository on GitHub. Hopefully we'll get a chance to do a session on this in the near future. We've got tests in here, so in the tests folder, we've got a feature file. These are very, very simple tests, and I haven't got anywhere near the coverage that I would like. And they're not as kind of end-to-end as some of our tests that we write on project, but they're good simple examples that I can use to illustrate the point. So we have a scenario here, which is that somebody tries to create an environment in the development hub, register a development environment without providing the mandatory fields. So in this case, when we open up the form with a new command and save the record without entering anything, then we expect required fields must be filled in on the two following fields, so name and URL. They're the only things that are captured, and they're both mandatory. Now, I've done a kind of a dummy pull request here as an example. So let's say somebody's coming in to contribute to this repository, and if I just look at the commit, we've changed the required level on the URL field to optional. And we haven't updated the test, so we're assuming that the existing feature files are still correct. And we can see all of the checks that have run as part of this pull request. So the build has succeeded, solution checker succeeded, apologies, they're not in order. The deployment has succeeded, integration tests succeeded, and Sonar Cloud Analysis succeeded as well. So the only one that has failed there is our UI test stage. So if I come into the checks here, and even if you're not explicitly a member of this project, it's public, so anybody could open it up, view more details on Azure pipelines. And this is that particular pipeline run for that pull request, so we can see the branch name is included in the version there. And we can see how all of the stages here have completed, unit tests passed in there, solution checker and deployment and test, we've got 95.8% passing. So if we open up that, and it's just filtering by the field ones, but instantly we can see create a new environment without mandatory fields has failed. And this is Azure Pipelines functionality, but you can even see the history of that test. So we can see that the previous pipeline run, it was succeeding. So it's definitely as a result of this change. But what's more interesting is that if you, the actual error message, of course, is here. So we expected the string to be required fields must be filled in, but we got nothing back. And if we look at the attachment, we can see a screenshot that the build agent took at the point of failure. And it's now immediately obvious at this point that, yeah, the URL is not mandatory. Now, I've got Azure boards turned off for this project, but you can then at this point create a new bug from that failing test, and whoever picks that up is going to have a direct link back to the pipeline run and the screenshot, everything they need to fix that issue or to fix their own pull request. That I wanted to show on the CI aspects of this, and I think we're also running out of time. That has been 50 minutes, so we probably haven't got too much time to take questions now, although I'm happy to accept any messages from anybody. Or if you want to raise issues on the repository, then that's also an option, and we can get back to you on there pretty quickly.
Cheers, folks. I think the only question message one that's just coming now is, do we need to test if this test framework still works after Dataverse updates and EasyRepro updates?
So the framework will only stop working after an EasyRepro update if they introduce a breaking change to the API. And admittedly, that is a problem with EasyRepro. They don't follow a kind of a semantic versioning for their package version, so it makes it very difficult for us to know if they've introduced a break and change.
Yeah.
The only thing that we can really say there is that I would recommend you just use the version of EasyRepro that the framework is dependent on, because then you know for sure that it'll build against it. But yeah, I couldn't guarantee that if you were using a different version of EasyRepro that you wouldn't get runtime errors. it's something that we'll maybe try and have to pick up. We discussed it before with Tyler Olson, who's the maintainer of EasyRepro, about the versioning strategy, but it's still not quite there yet.
Yeah, just quickly, just to expand on Max, that's the advantage of using this framework, is that if there is something that you really need fixed in EasyRepro and it's taking longer, we can often merge it faster until EasyRepro has the fix. Then we can retrofit that fix back in once they've done it. So that's a real key feature that we offer, and it's a differentiator.
Yeah, you have plenty of options. You can either do your own custom binding if you don't particularly want to wait for anybody. As Mark's just mentioned, the kind of Git workflow for EasyRepro is quite a heavyweight Git flow strategy because they're maintaining multiple different releases. We're just saying that we support Power Apps, so not on-prem, just the latest version online. So we can kind of accept pull requests directly into master, whereas EasyRepro don't. You have to do a pull request into a develop branch. And then at some point in the future, it's been weeks, I think, for me in the past, that'll get merged. And then at some point later than that, it'll get published and pushed to NuGet. So it's kind of an unknown quantity. But if you contribute to our framework on GitHub, as soon as it's merged, it's going to get pushed to NuGet. So you'll have that new package version available for you immediately.
Cheers, folks. There is a couple more questions. In the interest of getting people into their next session, I might have to ask if you can take them offline, if that's okay. I'm sorry to be the bad person here. I'm just conscious I've got another session I've got to get into and get those speakers prepped as well. In the meantime, if anybody could, if they couldn't come off mute and just give the guys a round of applause and say thank you for presenting, because it was a great session. So,
cheers. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Phil.
Stop recording and I'll give it a few minutes. So this room will still